So now let's just close this. So now the next thing we need to implement is actually loading the data back. Once we get to this screen, the data should be loaded back and put into these cells here. Okay. So let's stop that. Close the console. Now let's go to the weight log table view controller. Okay. So actually, let's first go to the storyboard and connect some IB outlets. Okay. So if we do the assistant editor, we'll go to here. So now let's create an IB outlet for the table view. So if we hold Control and click and drag this to here, we create an outlet, and we'll call it the table log. Okay. It's already referenced to nil. So now we have a reference to this table view here, where all the cells will be. Okay. So now what we can do is actually load the data now from, because we've saved the data here, so the data is being saved into the table for CoreData. Now when the user selects save weight, it comes to the screen, and now we want to, right when we get to the screen, we want to display the data. Okay, so now we can actually implement this all under view did load, so which means the first time that this screen is being loaded, let's just delete all these comments, it'll load the data. Okay, so first thing we need to do is determine how many objects are in our database or our table, because we need to generate how many rows or however many rows we need in this table view. Because if you see, where is it? Number of rows in section, this function right here, we're returning 0 right now. So that means there's 0 rows it's going to create. So we actually want to return, like it says here, the number of rows in the section. So the number of rows is going to be however many entries we have in our table. So let's find out how many objects we have. Okay. So let's create a reference again to our app delegate. So appdel, which is, I'm just going to leave those off. Just let Swift take care of it and do type inference. So let's do a UI application dot shared application dot delegate, and cast this as an app delegate. And then we have the variable context. It's exactly the same code as before. Equals the appdel dot managed object context. Okay, and make sure you add import CoreData, or else you'll get an error because of the managed object context. Okay. Now to fetch the data, we actually have to create a request, because we're trying to get the data from the table. So we'll create a variable called request, which is of type NSFetch, or actually let's just leave that out, NSFetch request, and the entity name that we want to request from is, let me go back, we want to select this one here. So the entity name, we want to select from user weights, that's the table that we want. Okay. And then another helpful hint that I saw from rm2kdev is request dot returns objects as false equals false. Okay. Now let's get the total number of objects that are in our table. We have right now, we've requested this table, and now let's just see how many objects are in it. There's multiple ways to do this. What you can do is actually generate an array which gets the objects that are in your table and then just count them one by one. But what I found is a simpler way to do it. Let's create a variable. We'll call it total entries, and it's going to be of type int. and we'll set it initially equal to 0. Okay. So the total entries in our table equals context dot count for fetch request. Now the fetch request is simply request. An error, again, I'm not going to implement error handling here, but feel free to. And now in total entries should be the total number of objects in our list. So let's just check it out. Print line and print out total entries, and just make sure that it is working correctly. So we'll go here to run. And now log your weight. Now actually there should be one already in the list. So if we go to the log, so yeah, we already have one in the list. So let's go back and enter in another weight, 2358, and say save your weight. So now we have 2 objects in the list. So it's working correctly. Or at least it's counting correctly. Okay, so let's stop this. Okay. So now we have the total number of entries. Now we can come down, let's get rid of this actually. We can come down to this function here. So number of rows in section. So the number of rows that we want to create is total entries. Okay, that's how many rows we want to make. Number of sections in table view. We're only going to have 1 section, so don't return 0, return 1. If you leave that as 0, even if everything else is correct, you won't get the table you won't get the table correctly. So we're going to set that to 1 section in our table view, and total entries here. Okay. So now let's implement another function. Let's see if it's down here. Self a row at index. So let's implement this function, and they've already done some of the work for us. In this case, we're not going to be using a reuse identifier, so let's just create our own here. So let's create a variable or a constant called cell, similar to what they had. It's going to be of type UI table view cell. And this is a UI table view cell, and it's going to be, we're going to adjust the style here, and we're going to say the style is UI table view cell style here dot, and we're going to use a subtitle, okay, because we want to have the weight and then underneath it the date. The reuse identifier, we're not actually using one, so we'll just say nil. Or we'll just say default or something. It doesn't really matter. Sure. Okay. So what essentially we're doing here is we're creating the cell. So this number of rows in section, so however many entries you have is how many times this function will be called. So if we have 2 entries, this will be called twice. So you'll create 2 cells. Okay. So essentially we're creating a subtitle cell, and then we're basically going to populate that cell with the data from our table. Okay. So again, we need to access our table, right? So we need a variable. We need essentially the same things. So I'm just going to actually come up here and copy this, paste it. So we have the reference to our app delegate and the context. And now we actually need this one too. So we need to fetch the request. So we get a request, we fetch the request for our table, and now once we have the request, we can go through. It returns an NS array, or actually we can execute the fetch request. So let's first execute the fetch request. So we can get the results, which is of type NS array. and it's a context.execute fetch request, and the request is going to be this request error, not going to implement. So we have the results inside of an NS array. Okay. So now, in order to get the actual results for our table for the right values, this is going to go through. This brings back all the objects in this user weights table. So we're passed in an index path of where the users of what cell you're on. So whether you're on the 0th, the 1st, the 2nd. So what we can actually do is get contents and put into cell. So we can say create a variable called this weight, which is the current weight that we're trying to display in the cell, is going to be result of index path dot row. Oops. Index path dot. Why is that coming up like that? Index path dot row, and then we'll cast this as a user weights object. Why am I getting an error here? Okay, the reason why we get that error I left off in the storyboard, we have to actually connect this table view with, since this is our data source and delegate. So control click drag this to here, and it's going to be our data source and our delegate. So we make those connections. We can make sure that they are made. Look at the connections guide. So we have data source and delegate both for this. Okay, so now it should work fine. So let's go back to our weight log table view controller. I'm sorry guys, I totally missed that. And let's inherit from UI table view controller. Controller. UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. There we go. Okay. And now these functions here are actually the UI table view data source methods. So now if we actually click on command, click this data source, we can see the required function. So we have number of rows in section is a required method to implement, and cell for row at index is a required one to implement. So let's actually just copy and paste this. Actually, this is the same one that we have back. The main difference is we have an exclamation point here. So that's just to be aware. So in this case, if you use the one that's already in here, change that to an exclamation point, and you see this error went away. Okay. We just had to make sure that we inherited from the UI table data source. Okay. So now we created a variable, this weight, and it's of type user weights, and it's going to be the results array at the index path.row wherever the user selects, and we cast that back as a user weights object, which is our custom class. And the reason we cast it as a user weights object is so that we can have access to the elements through this class. So we can just say .weight, .date, etc. Makes it a lot easier. So now we can simply just say cell.text, which is the main title, equals this weight dot weight, and then we can say plus a space plus this weight dot units. So then we'll have the weight and then a space and then the units afterwards, regardless of what they are. And then we can say cell.detail text label dot text, which is the subtitle, equals this weight dot date. Okay. Then return cell. So we've filled the cell with the correct value, the weight, and the units, and then the date. So now we just simply return the cell. Okay. So now let's test this out. So we'll save it, run it. Now, if we click on log your weight, now if we just go to the log, we had some in there already. So as you can see, they've shown up here now. So June 19th at 3:33, it's already 3:58. We've put some in here. Now let's just see if it continues to work. So if we say 588 kilograms, save your weight, boom, 588 kilograms, it's in here. Now the user can't actually edit any of these, so we'll have to implement some editing abilities. But we can go back and just continue to log. So right now everything's being logged. Pounds, so it's 236 pounds, 588 kilograms, and the dates here. So it's working correctly. Okay. Now we want to be able to edit the row. So like say they can swipe and then click delete. So if we come down here, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna delete all of these and then take in the ones that we want. So let's delete these right here. And then again, we'll click on Command, click on View Data Source, and then we want can edit at row index path. So we want to take this method, which allows us to edit. Go back to here and say override this, and make it a method. So can edit row at index path, return true. So the user can edit that row. Okay. Now we need another method calls commit editing style. After a row has been minus or plus bottom invoked, the data source must commit the change. Okay, so inside here we're actually going to be deleting the object from our table and from the screen. Okay, so let's copy this function. Go back. Make it a method. So inside here we want to delete object from entity and remove from list. So basically reload, right? So again, we're going to need all of the same things. So all of this to get the reference to our table. Okay. So now we have the results here. And now what we can do is say context.delete object, this one. And then what object do we want to delete? We want to delete results of index path dot row, and then we want to cast that as an NS. Excuse me, as an NS managed object. Okay. And now we've deleted that object from the entity or from the table. Now we need to save context.save error nil. So we save the table. And now one thing that we need to do is actually update our total entries because it's reduced by 1. So total entries equals total entries minus 1. Right? And now we need to actually reload the table. So we can do a table log dot reload data. So once the user enters delete or deletes once the user commits to the editing style, which is presses the delete button, so they swiped and press delete, we'll remove the object from the table and then reload that table. Okay. So now let's actually just say, just to see if this is working correctly, we're going to do a print line. Oops. Print line, and we're going to print out results of index path dot row, just to print out the object. Actually, we're going to put this inside this. Let's say object being deleted is that. All right. Oops. Okay, so there's the object being deleted, and then we'll say print line done. So it's done deleting. Okay, so let's go back to our app and make sure that this deleting is working. Okay, we'll override declaration. Override. I see. Override. There we go. Let's run it. So we go to log your weight, go to the log, and now we have all these things in here. Now if we swipe on one of them, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, we get this delete button to come up. Okay, before it wasn't implemented. So now we can click delete, and it's removed from the list, and the table is updated. And as we can see, the object being deleted is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 done, and now it's no longer in our list. So we can go back to the log, and it's removed. The table is updated, and the count is also updated. So we didn't have one extra cell come in down here. Okay. So we can stop that. So it's working correctly now. We can remove objects from the table, reload the table. It's working good. Okay. So another thing that we can implement is actually the user. So let's say the user's inside the app, right? Log your weight. So enter in weight. Okay, 225 pounds. Save it. Okay, it comes here 225. Now there has to be an easy way to delete all of these objects. So you don't want, imagine this thing's filled. You don't want to go through each one, delete, delete. We should have a button here that says clear log. So you can just clear the entire contents of the table and reload it to nothing. Okay, so that's what we're going to implement now. So let's get out of this app. Just close it. And now if we come back to here and say, let's go to the storyboard, and let's actually add a bar button here. If I was over that way, there we go. Let's add one here that says great. Xcode closed. It's pretty buggy right now, but that's because it's a beta. It's understandable. So let's go back to bar button and add a button right there. It doesn't like me adding that button. So let's open it again. Maybe it's because I have this open still. Alright, one more time. Bar button. Add it. Crash. No. Okay, I think we're good now. So let's call it clear log. Okay. So now we can open up and close that and open up this one. And now let's create an IB outlet or an IB action. So we create an action and call it button clear log. Okay. So now when the user presses this button, we want to actually delete the entire contents of the table. So again, we're going to need all of this stuff. And the only way that I know how to do this is to actually go through one by one through the entire table and delete everyone one by one. But it's all done programmatically. Okay, so we have the request. Now we need to actually get the results. So it's the same as below. NS array equals, let me just save it just before it crashes. Context. It's going to crash again. It's slowing down on me. Context. Great. Alright, context dot execute fetch request. The fetch request is request. Sorry about this, guys. It's really buggy right now. and this is nil. No errors. Okay, I'm just going to keep saving it. Okay, so now we have the results, and now what we can do is go through the list. So for I, this is of type any object in results. Let's go through the list. So context dot delete object, and what object? We want to delete I, cast it as a managed NS managed object. Let's actually create this, make this variable. So this is going to be weight entry, just to make it a little better. Weight entry. Cast it as NS managed object. So oops. So we delete that one object from the list. Now we've gone through every object in the array. Now we can say context.save, no errors. And now we also need to update our total entries back to 0 and reload the table. Table log.reload data. Alright, save that. And let's try running it. So everything should be implemented now. The whole table should be able to be cleared. Okay, so log your weight. Let's go to the log real quick. So we still have some things in here. We click clear log. Everything's deleted from the list. And then if we go back to the log, nothing's in here. Okay, so let's just enter some things. Show your weight. Okay, save another one, 2580. Save. Okay, log's still there. Let's go home. And now let's close the app. So let's stop it. And then let's run it again. We go to log your weight and log, everything's still here. Clear log, everything's cleared. Alright, so it's working perfect. So we've pretty much finished the app. You could adjust the user interface to however you like. But overall it's working pretty well. We've implemented CoreData and it's working flawlessly. Created the log, so you can make it as detailed as you want. But I hope this is a good little introduction about the app, and I really hope it helps some people out there. I know it's extremely helpful to see a video. I'm sorry this one's extremely long, but it was a lot more information than I expected. Alright, well, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I look forward to the next one. See you guys later.